Who dares? Who dares to interrupt? Oh, okay. Hey guys, what is going on? My name is Riot, and I've got more cool stuff for you, and this time it's even better. Check this out. So last time we had randomly generated drums and sounds. This time we got randomly generated drum beats and drum kits. This is incredibly useful, and you can use this with your own samples easily. You can swap out the samples that I put in this and then just put your own ones into this. So what is happening here? There's a sequencer, then there's a drum rack with the drum kit in it, and then there's a little bit of post-processing. All you need in terms of MIDI is you just need to hold one note. It doesn't even matter which one it is. So let me just play this and hit randomize on the sequencer a couple times. As you might have been able to see, there's like some general controls over here for the pitch of the entire drum kit and whether or not the kick and the snare should be sidechaining everything else. That's all like built into this drum rack. But what is happening in the sequencer? What's generating these patterns? So what I've done here is for each of these samples, we've got kick, clap, snare, 2 closed hi-hats, 2 open hi-hats, 2 percussions, and 1 like little ghost snare. And for each of those, I have made handmade custom rhythms using arpeggiators and the pitch MIDI effect. And like it starts very easy, where for example here, just for a kick at the start of every bar and nothing else, it's just an arpeggiator on like super slow, just hitting that over and over. But then there are really fast patterns back here where it needs 16th notes. So what it's doing here is the arpeggiator is set to 16th notes, and it's set to do 7 extra steps. So to one note it adds 7 more, but I'm holding 2 notes because I'm turning the one note that comes in into 2 with this pitch effect over here. So now 2 notes go into this arpeggiator, so it's playing 32 notes. Basically 2 bars of 16th notes, and then after that arpeggiator, I'm grabbing the notes that I want to make the rhythm I'm going for with more pitch effects that grab just exactly that note, and then they tune those MIDI notes back to the note that's necessary to trigger the kick drum in the rack. Oh boy! Even though this is absolutely unnecessarily complicated, it's surprisingly easy on your CPU. I mean, this is like idling at 1%. It goes up to 4 if I hit randomize. Yeah, this is pretty easy for the CPU, surprisingly, even though there's a lot of different devices in here. If you hit randomize while a held MIDI note is playing the drum pattern, it's not going to update until the next MIDI note is played, so just need to know that. And so I've made different patterns just for the kick, for the clap, for the snare. For the closed hi-hats, both share the same groove pool, I would say. 2 open hi-hats that also share the same rhythms. 2 percussions that have a lot of different rhythms. And then the ghost snare at the end has some slight variations of the percussion rhythms. I wrote down how many patterns are in each of these groups. Okay, so for the kick drum, there are 44 different patterns. The clap has 14 different patterns. The snare has 6 different patterns. The closed hi-hats have 15 different patterns. The open hi-hat has 6 different patterns. Then the percussions have 62 different patterns, and the ghost snare has 61. There's a very small chance that for each of those samples, it'll just select no pattern and it'll be quiet. So I'm going to add that as 1 to each of these numbers. And then if we multiply them all together, we get the number of possible randomizable patterns that can come out of this. I'm going to let Google Translate tell us how big that number is. All right, so Google Translate, how many variations are possible?
14.585.141.491.200.
Sick. And now in German.
14.585.141.491.200.
Yay, a lot. Not all of them are going to sound great, but the success rate with these is surprisingly high. At least the rhythms somewhat make sense, and you can save newly generated rhythms over here in the snapshots. I've added a few. I'll give them names before I put this on my Patreon. This works in Ableton 11 and 12, but in 12 you can even randomize the drum kit, because the sample similarity search thing lets you completely replace all the samples in a drum rack with new samples. Or you could lock a certain sample, like, hey, don't change the kick drum, but change everything else, and that gives you even more possibilities. But don't worry if you don't have Ableton 12 yet. I've made something for the Ableton 11 people too. I'm going to show you in a moment. I'm just going to go through the other functionalities here. So sidechain for kick and snare. So this sidechains all the other samples. There's like internal routing happening here where kick and snare go through the main output and everything else goes through a separate output here. And then on that channel sort of is also a frequency shifter. So you can shift everything but the kick and the snare up and down. I thought that's kind of cool. There is a random panning for every time a hi-hat or a percussion is being hit. So if this is on 0, then everything's pretty centered. And if this is all the way up, you'll be, especially if you wear headphones, you'll be able to hear like all the percussions and hi-hats going crazy around your head. There's a little bit of randomization in the velocity values for all the percussions and hats. If you want to, you can like turn this up. Just sometimes makes it sound a little more natural. And then this dynamics macro here involves velocity information that I put into these patterns as well. So like some patterns you might see, I've like written them out here with X's. If there's a smaller X, that means that's a hit that has slightly less velocity. And you see like over here where it's grabbing the necessary notes from the arpeggiator to create the pattern, there's a velocity effect on some of them, and this dynamics fades them all in together. So if this is on 0, then whatever pattern you have here or whatever pattern you've generated is all going to be, every MIDI note's going to be at the same velocity. And if you turn it up, then you get those little dynamics in there. I'm trying to find a good example. I think this one that I saved earlier. So without dynamics, and then with, like all those hi-hats and percussions sound a little bit more natural. You can change the pitch of the samples individually if you want to. You can go in here and change the transpose, but there's also a master pitch for the entire drum kit, which is pretty fun. And then there's just like some slight post-processing with auto pans and a little bit of compression. It's pretty subtle, but it does a little bit. And if you go and replace these samples that are in here with your own samples, that's totally doable. Just like keep it sort of in the system. Only put kicks into the cell that says kick, only put claps here, only put snares here. You can obviously do whatever you want, but if you do it like that, then you get the most normal sounding results. Of course, you can put whatever you want in whatever cell you want, but... And if my calculations are correct, if I take a kick, let's just say that one, and drop it just on here, because yes, there is this little pitch thing before that needs to stay there, but if this is all collapsed anyway, and I just drop this kick here, then it should... Yeah, it just exchanges it, and it keeps whatever devices are in front of it still there, so all good. Now, if you don't have Ableton 12 yet, fret not. I've made a special project file with the same sequencer in it, and I have replaced the simplers with samplers, and I filled them with Foley. So the kick cell contains 128 kick-like Foley samples. Same with the clap and the snare cell and everything. I think both the closed hats both share the same 128 samples, same with the open hats, and I think same with the percussions. With each of these groups having 128 samples to choose from, you can now randomize this kit as well by hitting the random here. I'm just going to collapse all of this so that's a little less messy. So you can click randomize over here and generate a new kit and then save that as a snapshot separately from the grooves. This was from right before I started filming this video and it just sounds really cool. I like it. I'm gonna save that so you all have it too. And just because big numbers are funny, we can do this crazy calculation again, where we can take the number of possible sequences that can be generated now and multiply it with the amount of possible drum kits that can be generated. With the drum kits, we've got 128 kicks, claps, snares, closed hats, open hats, and percussion samples. So 6 times 128. But technically it's also choosing 2 open hi-hats and 2 closed hi-hats and 2 percussions. So I'd say this is like 128 to the power of 9? Roughly, give or take. Google Voice thing, how many different drum kits can possibly be generated from these Foley samples?
A lot.
Okay, just a few last things. I replaced the randomization for the velocity of the percussions in the Foley version with just a smash, distortion, and compression type thing. Because it's like soft Foley and then you can just go. Especially if you want to like pitch it down to have like some really low, trashy sounding kind of loop. Like if you got something like that and then you pitch that down a bit and then add. This is great. All right, back to this. I'm gonna save that one too. Also, when you download these from my Patreon, they show up like project files. You can just drag these into whatever project you are currently working on. You don't have to like open these and then work in them. You should just be able to, let me see, this is the final version of the other one. If I just drag that project file in here, then, yep. There it is. I'll delete all the other empty tracks from that project file because otherwise it's just gonna be a mess, but yeah. And now that's made it over here. Obviously the whole thing syncs to your host tempo. Also, this isn't insanely big, by the way. Even though I've like filled the racks up with my Foley samples, it's not that much. It's like about 700 samples, but it's only 90 megabytes. So it's a quick download. Now, one downside is I haven't been able to get swing working with the arpeggiators in a way where it's like easy to use, but you can do something else and this might work. Let me actually see real quick. So let's say we've got a drum groove here and I want this groove, but I want it shuffled. What you can do, and you can do this with the Foley version or with the other version, doesn't matter, make a MIDI track, then set this MIDI track to in, and as the input, select the MIDI track that has the drum sequencer on it. Now, make sure this is record armed, and then just hit record. And now we've got a beautiful little MIDI file with that groove, even containing the little velocity variations that I programmed into the individual grooves. And then the next step is to just delete the sequencer from that track and move the MIDI up here. Now that MIDI is playing that exact same groove, and now we can just grab a groove from the groove pool and add swing. I know there's a bit of an annoying workaround, but that's the best I've got so far. If I find any better methods, I will let you know. Maybe with MIDI note delay, maybe there's a way, but yeah. And we're shuffling. Nice. Actually, to make this easier, I'll make sure that like both project files just have 2 tracks, one with the drum sequencer on them, and then below them an empty MIDI track that is set to receive MIDI from that drum sequencer in case you wanna commit the groove to a MIDI rhythm and then maybe add swing later on. And before I let you go, I just want to show you how you can exchange all those drum samples easily in Ableton 12. So here I've got the normal drum sequencer without the Foley libraries, just one sample in each of these cells. And then if you want to, you can load them by hand with your own stuff and then have Ableton look for similar samples, or you can just go straight away and say like, hey, exchange all of this for me, please. And usually the first time you click this, it might take a little bit longer, and after that it goes a little faster. You can always go back as well. And let's just listen to this, and then I'm gonna just have these samples be refreshed. Nice. Another one. Where did that vocal come from? I'm just gonna hit random over here as well, and then give new drum samples, so we get a new groove and a new drum kit. Again. Another one. Another one. And should you ever feel like, hey, I want to keep this snare, but exchange everything else though, then you can just hit this little lock button here. And now everything changed except the snare. And if you just want to change the snare, then you can just click this little left and right button here. Oh, we've hit one of those rare moments where there is no kick in this pattern. That happens very rarely. Woo! Let's try and pitch that up. Pitch it down. And you can always just go back in and be like, hey, okay, I like this pitch down vibe, but not the snare, please. And then you can go in here and still adjust the transposition of just the snare. This is awesome. All right, go to my Patreon if you want to download this. I don't have a free download in the description today, I'm sorry, but next time. All right, again, this works in Ableton 11 and 12. In 12, it's even better because of the sample similarity search, and everybody have a good time. Feel free to, if you try this thing out, like post a story on Instagram or something and tag me in it, because then I'll see it, and I will be very happy if I see you playing around with this drum kit generator and having fun. And all right, have a nice day. Bye!